So we're going to go from Josh, who's sitting here in London, all the way to the other side of the planet, to Australia, and the fantastic Vanessa Richards, who is going to give us insight with regards to the discipline of trust. So everyone, please put your hands together for the fabulous Vanessa. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And thank you. Sorry, apologies. I have a very old-fashioned clock in the background that's just letting me know that it's 6 o'clock in Australian time. Okay, so hello to everyone, and thank you to Sarah and Rose and everyone else at Satala for the opportunity to speak. My name's Vanessa Richards. I'm a consultant and I work in internal and external reporting and governance around all aspects of non-financial value. So from the vital and engaging world of communication that Josh has spoken about, we're moving to the migraine-inducing world of reporting. I wanted to share some thoughts on what we can learn from the practical discipline that financial markets have developed in order to create trust, not just in public reports, but also in the financial information that organisations use to make decisions themselves internally. I'm interested in how those lessons might be useful to build trust around the creation of non-financial value in areas such as biodiversity or social licence or decarbonisation. In particular, and this may cause a few people to go and make themselves a cup of tea until this talk is over, I want to talk to you about accountants. So I'm a communicator by trade. I've had what has been a genuine pleasure of working with accountants for many years, helping them to articulate what they do and why it matters to their clients, to the media, to investors and other audiences. The reason that anybody's ever paid me to do that is not just that the subject matter can be a bit complicated or that accountants are not always great at explaining things. To be fair, most of us are pretty bad at explaining our own areas of expertise. A big reason is that what they do matters. It is and always has been at the centre of trust that underpins successful societies. So, a brief history lesson. Accounting developed in parallel with complex societies from as far back as we can see. It was the catalyst for the development of writing 8,000 years ago in Sumeria. It underpinned the development of the alphabet by Phoenicians who used it to keep track of international trade. Egyptian pharaohs appointed bookkeepers to manage royal warehouses and auditors to check them. And if they found any shortfall, the bookkeepers got fed to the Nile crocodiles. So if you look about you, you will see that this role is still the same today, not the crocodiles, I hope not anyway, but the centrality of accounting and accountants to underpinning trust in transactions across markets, across society, across a complex society. There was a very tolerant and wise partner at the firm of accountants I worked at who was once listening to me grumble about work, and he said, if you ever doubt that what you're doing matters, look at the places where accountants have no influence. It's the foundation of transparency, and without it, there's no accountability. And I've seen this echoed again and again. At the moment, there's a shortage of accountants worldwide, and that has led some commentators, Wall Street Journal and Bloomberg, for example, to suggest that the future of capitalism is under threat. Now, I'm not sure I would go quite as far as suggesting that the collapse of society will be brought about by too few accountants, but I do think we need to learn from them if we're going to meet the unprecedented sets of challenges that we're facing. I'll give you 3 reasons why. First of all, complexity and rapid change require a unity of purpose, and that must be built on trust. Anyone who's worked in climate or environmental strategy or reporting knows that the goalposts are moved every week. Navigating that requires everyone to believe that those who they are working with are also pushing towards the same goal. Secondly, your customers, suppliers, partners, communities, governments, everyone needs to know that the choices we're making are the right ones, and that the things that we will inevitably have to sacrifice are worth it. In that, the fundamental importance of measuring and verifying value is crucial. And thirdly, you now need to justify your place in the world, your right to use our collectively precious resources. Being competitive is no longer the only criteria for survival. People want to know what contribution your organisation is making to the world now and for the future. So, how do we take this idea of accounting and what's been built around it and apply it to the messy and slippery world of non-financial value? For me, it comes down to expertise, probity, authority, and access. So, expertise first. We need expertise in monitoring, measuring, and reporting on value. And I think what Shiv was talking about, absolutely spot on for this. We need to understand, we need to have information, and we need to understand what that information means. So things like carbon emissions and forecasts are obvious examples of performance measures, but we've got a bunch of others that are coming along behind, measures of biodiversity, soil health, water, community resilience. We could name dozens of others. None of these metrics are straightforward. None of them are plug and play. They all require analysis and commitment to ensuring that they reflect reality. This isn't just to ensure that your own decision-making as an organisation, a business or a society is sound, although that's important. You can expect any one of these metrics to be subject to scrutiny and from a range of sources. So take the ongoing issue of methane, for example, here in Australia. The International Energy Agency, the University of New South Wales, a bunch of other people have used satellite data to measure methane emissions from Australian coal mines and gas production. Their findings suggest that emissions could be up to 60% higher than is currently reported by the industry. Now, no one's saying that Australian coal miners are deliberately misreporting emissions, but it does raise the question of whether the industry has robust measurement systems in place. And if they don't, why not? And if they don't know that they don't, why not? Why hasn't it been raised and addressed? Why isn't that a priority? And it may be that it's just something that hasn't come to the attention of management. There is always inevitably going to be issues and clashes of methodology, tracking and reporting. There will always be different ways of approaching it. You can skin a cat any number of ways. With goodwill and collaboration, you can address those and you can come to a workable solution for all parties. But repeated instances of these kinds of dissonances erodes goodwill and it erodes trust. And it's an open invitation for the industry or for individual companies to be blamed. Fundamentally, if your own people, your own systems, and or your management culture is not robust, that kind of scrutiny can be devastating. So the next thing I think we can learn from accounting is around probity. So accountants are trusted to take the role that they do in financial management because of the rigour and the probity that's expected from their profession. So accounting bodies around the world require members to abide by high professional and ethical standards. Accountants are expected to demonstrate integrity, objectivity, professional competence and due care, confidentiality and professional behaviour, whatever that form that takes. Failure to do so can result in expulsion from the profession. It can also lead to higher standards being applied by courts in civil or criminal matters because of the role that accountants are seen to be taking in the world. The professions that manage non-financial areas of performance can draw on the model of this probity for how to develop similar trusted professionals. Engineers, environmental scientists, human resources, many other professions could have their own guardians to fulfill similar trust-building functions over their areas of expertise. How many of you could see a role for, say, a chartered biodiversity executive, for example? Having someone with responsibility, expertise and reputation should be par for the course across every function that is responsible for curating non-financial performance. And the final point I think that you need to think about is authority and access. So, of course, in reality, there are many people who are already acting in these kinds of roles, and sometimes they're even seen to be and encouraged to act in that role by their organisation. But it's often an ad hoc response, and the responsibility of the role to maintain integrity is not always clearly defined. For example, where it might be considered acceptable for an accountant to advise the audit committee of the risks of a particular accounting treatment, there may be less support or no opportunity for an environmental manager to do the same in relation to water reporting. So I can see a future scenario where each critical area of performance has a function with explicit responsibility to maintain integrity. The skills of accountants, whether or not they're held by accountants, will be central to that. So, in summary, we will need all of our talents as historians, scientists, engineers, economists, writers, everyone, to establish the case for action and create consensus. But without measuring and verifying the value delivered by that action, courses cannot be corrected and consensus will not be maintained. So accountants alone cannot save the world, but the world will not be saved unless we all have our own version of an accountant. So
I love
that's
it.
my 2 cents worth.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Vanessa. Everybody, round of applause for the fabulous Vanessa Richards. And Vanessa, well, I mean, as we know, I'm originally a geologist, but nobody has ever quite inspired me so much as to go and learn to be an accountant. I mean, who knew? I can certainly think of a few people to feed to crocodiles potentially, though, if we can still keep that in circulation. So Vanessa, a question with regards to, I guess, the perhaps the access to authority and decision making, and perhaps trust in advice that's given that accountants have compared to, say, an environmental specialist or somebody else within the organisation. Is that something that has been built over 8,000 years of doing it, or what's the secret mechanism that makes the CEO or the board listen to the accountant more than the environmental specialist?
It is history. In part, it's because, you know, we are a generation, and this is part of the reason that I started my career in working with accountants to explain what they were doing, is that I think accounting in the maturity curve has got to the point where it's taken for granted. So it's understood that it's a thing. Not everyone looks inside the black box of accounting. Everyone just goes, it's a thing. It's important. We know it's important. Information gets spat out of that black box, and we take that information for granted. We think that money is real, for example. You know, we go, oh, that's worth 20 million. Gosh, you know, why is it worth 20 million? Who made that up? You know, it's come out of that black box, but nevertheless, it's, you know, there are good reasons why you should trust it, but not everyone understands what those reasons are. And we haven't yet got a black box for all of the things that we're working with. And there isn't the same level of rigor and the same depth of challenge and probity around it that you get in accounting. So, you know, for me, the classic example is your risk and audit committee. So as I said, you know, your accountant can, in coded terms or otherwise, go to the rack, cut through your layers of management, or the auditors will do the same thing and say, the way that you want to present this number is not acceptable, frankly. You know, this number does not stack up to reality. Yes, you can find an argument, you can find an accounting treatment that will give you that number, but it's not real. And we won't be able to stand behind it if anyone challenges us on it. It's much harder for people to do that in any other area. And we need to build that. But to do that, you have to have people in roles where the organisations need to be prepared to challenge themselves around these things. And I've worked in the fields of climate change in particular, but also in other areas of sustainability, around the governance and reporting that underpins those. And what you find is that because nobody wants to give bad news, and you don't have authority. Like as if you've got the authority in your role, and if it's actually your job to give them the bad news, which, in some ways I think the risk function could perform that role, then you can cut through, and you can actually, protect trust. Because what happens when you're saying everything's blue, the whole world is blue, everything inside our organisation is blue, and then somebody flies over the top of it with a drone and says, "Oh, I don't think so." That's it. Reputation is gone, trust is gone, and very rarely can you get it back.
And so with that, Vanessa, so you're mentioning the risk word, which of course there are lots of people on the call who will start smiling to themselves because they know I could go off down a fantastic avenue. Because, and I mean, I think with regards to this, so of course, in my other role in life, in terms of being a consultant and Satala, we set Satala up back in 2014 as a risk management consultancy. And that was there almost as the Trojan horse to get things like sustainability, technical aspects, all of those areas, including the financials, but roll them together and then say, so what? Be, the good, the bad, the ugly, whatever, and be able to push that through. And the reason why risk management was that kind of the vessel in which to put it is because risk management is a core part of accountancy, reporting. It's cited in almost every single regulation, etc., that's out there. And that's great because it gives you that platform to then go, hello, everybody. Let me now share what we think is going on. But one of the interesting aspects there is that if in that audit and risk committee, the person who is kind of holding the pen or the microphone or whatever at that moment is only an accountant, and actually going back to the scoping question earlier, is only thinking that the material risks are the ones that have a large financial hurdle. Mm-hmm. Something that I think is interesting at the moment is then how do you get that individual to think more broadly, to say it's not just money that we're measuring things in. There's the people, there's the planet aspects as well. How are you seeing that change and evolve at the moment?
Well, one of the roles that I've taken in my career has been sort of as trying to knit together the financial reporting and the non-financial reporting functions, and actually doing that within a Big Four firm as well. So we had the teams, and I absolutely agree. So I have been sort of effectively taking a pot shot at the sustainability function here and saying, get your act together, get some discipline around it, make sure that you can justify and report on and have a whole lot of governance and control over the information that you're producing. By the same token, I would say the opposite to, well, not the opposite, but I would say the parallel to accountants is stop pretending that this is real and that your world of money and things in spreadsheets is the only thing that, not only the only thing that matters, but the only thing that's real. Because it's not even real. So, who are you kidding? And you need to step out of, and you need to walk into these worlds. And actually with the emphasis in the TCFD and in Australia with the AASB's guidance on reflecting climate change impacts in the financials, you were starting to see that. And it's really interesting being in the room for that, because you just get like, they twitch and they turn and the accountants are just like so uncomfortable with this process. But once they've been through it, and then, we're a couple of years down the track now, and now they're all over it. And they're absolutely, talking about things like adaptation risks and, the RCP 8.5 and, the whole thing. They've just absorbed it and it's become part of what they consider. So it's not impossible.
And I think that's really exciting because, again, so from that trust perspective, so you've got that profession that is trusted, even though the deep, dark secret is that what they're doing isn't real. Because actually what they're doing is reflecting, they're almost kind of I guess like a bridge across to what is real, or the interpretation of what is real, that's what's out there. So as a geologist, I'm looking at a rock and an accountant says to me, great, how much is in the ground? And I look at them and say, well, on this hand, it could be that. And on that hand, it could be this. And depending on that accountant, they will either go for the little number, a middle number, or the big number, invariably the big number, if you're trying to pump the valuation. But I think this is really interesting, because does the person at the end of the day who's then saying, hey, do I want to buy your asset? Who do they believe more? The accountant or the geologist? Probably the accountant, who doesn't actually understand how good the original numbers were. So it's really interesting translation.
Yeah. There's a collective delusion. I mean, it's where I think, it ties to behavioural economics as well, where everyone suddenly went, do you mean people were making these decisions? Like people with
Don't trust
people
them.
who can be really stupid, and people who make irrational decisions, and people who panic because everyone else seems to be running that direction, and they think, oh God, maybe I should too, and to anyone outside of that world, it's blindingly obvious. But you've had 100 years of empirical evidence that markets are not rational.
Yeah.
But people are uncomfortable with that, so they ignore
it. I'm loving that collective delusion, but let's all trust the accountants, and if in doubt, just all jump into a pit with a load of crocodiles. Fabulous. Excellent. So
that's the takeaway.
That's the takeaway. There are many more takeaways, by the way, everyone. So please listen to this recording again afterwards. Vanessa, thank you so much for that. Absolutely brilliant. Round of applause.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Vanessa. Fantastic.